We are tasked with talking about what we learned from this presidential election, this campaign season, the broader election, and what happens next. So I want to start, I mean, a lot of people have been talking and writing about the differences that we're experiencing and feeling in this moment versus 8 years ago when another woman ran for president and didn't make it and was beaten by Donald Trump. And so it's a little bit like deja vu all over again, although also feels very, very different. These 8 years have, a lot has happened. I want to start with you, Yolanda. When we were talking the other day, you and Ruth both mentioned something similar, so I'm going to ask both of you to talk about this. You said that you were in a conversation shortly after the election where Shiva came up, and that felt really resonant for you. So I'd love you to talk about that and how this moment feels for you, and then maybe transition to Ruth, who also was talking about how Jewish mourning rituals are giving you a little bit of a framework in these days. So we'll start with both of you on that and then move from there.
Sounds great. Well, it's so good to be in this room with all of you. Thank you for being here. What a time we're living in. So I just want to give a quick, Yolanda Savage-Narva. I use she, her pronouns. We are sitting on the ancestral land of the Lenape people. And I am really at an interesting crossroads. I was talking to a colleague, friend, a week and a half ago, right after the election, asking how she was doing, and she told me that it felt like she was sitting Shiva at the moment. And that really resonated with me because I had not quite figured out how to articulate this kind of heaviness, this despair, this kind of hopelessness that I personally was feeling at the moment, and not necessarily just for myself, but for humanity in general, and for, I think, all of the justice warriors that are here today in this room, for the shoulders that we stand on, and really trying to figure out how we kind of shake ourselves out of this moment, and really diving deep into the real underlying reason we are here today. And we are in this place where I think we're in a dark period, and I want to use darkness as a way of a place of transformation and of growth and of opportunity to kind of recalibrate where we are. And I think that's where we are. We are at a place where I think we have fallen, but that's when we're stronger. We find our strength and we know how to get up and excel. And so I want to really, you know, as a professional in this work and as a personal kind of reframe, think about where we are in that way and how we can use this opportunity to grow and to excel, and to think about how we pivot and we stay in the fight. You know, we aren't obligated to finish it, but we are definitely obligated, as LaTanya said earlier, to continue to finish, to continue to be in the fight and to do the work. And so I'm really in that space right now, and I am looking forward to the opportunity to also heal and take a break and kind of refill my bucket and then continue on the path ahead of us. Our ancestors did it for us. They didn't know any of us. They said, okay, what is it that I can do to make the world a better place? And so I am trying to come out on the other side of the challenging part of feeling despair and hopelessness to start actually feeling hope and an opportunity for rebirth and regrowth.
So thank you, and thank you, Yolanda, for doing the land acknowledgement. Thank you, Jodi, and thank all of you for being here and being motivated for the work that is before us. I did say that I felt like I was mourning, that Shiva was a good analogy because Shiva has instructions. Shiva has instructions. Most of you have been at a Shiva or sat Shiva yourself. Shiva has instructions. There are things you can't do right away because you have to let the mourning sink in. But then, without going through lots of ritual, you get up and you walk around the block and you get ready to take on the responsibilities that the women in this room need to take on. And it's a bad sign of age when you quote yourself. But in fact, at a synagogue, Town and Village Synagogue in Lower Manhattan in January 2017, right after that last election, I made a speech. I have no idea what I said, but someone asked me a question, and I said, and she said, this is just all nonstop despair. And I said, and I have been saying it a lot recently.
Can we say it all together?
Despair, go ahead. Despair is not a strategy. So let me just, it just shows that if you give your life to public speaking and organizing and whatever you, someplace in those 50 years, you'll have a five-word sentence that will stick with people.
I think you could get a T-shirt out of that. I feel there's merch opportunities. Despair is not a strategy.
So I want to say very quickly, really, what that means, quite seriously, which is that it is okay to feel despair. It's got two parts to that, those 5 words. It's okay to feel despair. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. The mandate is get up and walk around the block. That's not a strategy, and we are desperately in need of thoughtful strategies. You will hear them from the cohort members who are here, who I am privileged to work with. They enliven my week regularly. You will hear it from this panel. But actually, if I can take 1 minute, I want to say something else, because the theme of this panel, quite appropriately, and it's a pleasure to work with and for Illuminate, is the plight of women in America right now. I was going to stand up and say, if you want me to answer the question quickly, I would say bad. But I actually want to call to mind 3 other groups of women. One is all of the women, it's not just women, but we're talking about women here, all of the women in this country, many, many of whom are in much worse shape today and much, much worse shape going forward than most of the people in this room. And, you know, Naomi was asking us to bring down our ancestors. I'm asking us to bring out the people that we need to help carry on our shoulders. That's one group of women. But then, because you know my background, I'm going to talk about 2 other groups of women. The second group is the women all over the world. We're privileged to have at this wonderful gathering of women Robert Bank, who is the CEO of American Jewish World Service. And Robert put out messages on behalf of AJWS over the last 3 months, before the election and after the election, saying, for a global human rights organization, we know, he knows, AJWS knows, and you all need to know just how much is at stake for women in other countries who never had, in many instances, the rights that we enjoy, but who are going to be subject to a universe of decisions by the government-elect that will make their lives worse. I'm not going to go through all of the issues, but I promise you that I know what I'm talking about. Go on the AJWS website if you want more information. But as much as we carry ourselves into this battle with the cohort leader, with the cohort members, with all of you, for ourselves and the women and the people closest to us, there are these other groups of women. And the last group of women, and I'm going to ask you again to join me on a language issue. Please take the words immigrants out of your vocabulary for right now. I know it describes something, but it's being used nonstop by our executive leaders as a pejorative term. So I would ask you please to talk, since we are New Yorkers, about our newest New Yorkers. There are 500,000 people in this city who have come here, some of them before the most recent things, but many of them in the last 2 years. They are, I just want to be clear, because a lot of you saw me when you came in and tried to say hello, and I had things in my ears, because I'm talking nonstop about the likelihood that there will be raids of the shelters and food providers and churches and mosques and synagogues where the newest New Yorkers are right now getting a great hand out and hand up. They are likely to be among the first sites delivered by people whose intention is to deport the newest New Yorkers and then the other immigrants in this country out of this country. And if we can't hold all of these groups and think about ways, you cannot work on all of these issues at once, but you need to know that all of these groups are there. You need to know that the plight of women in America is not just the plight for us, as many issues as there are for those women. It's the is the trans people in this country. It is the LGBT communities all over the world. It is people right now sleeping on the floor of a storefront mosque in the West Bronx who want to know what they should do if the National Guard comes to the door. And so we are holding all of these people, which is why we have to get up and walk around the block and go do what needs to be done.
Thank you, Ruth. I do think we should get T-shirts that say "Despair is not a strategy." And I'm just, it's interesting. I was at an event, I think this was an October 7th anniversary event, and there was a man there who was a Holocaust survivor, and he kept saying that hope is not a strategy. And I was sort of like thinking about that afterwards and thinking, right, hope's not a strategy, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't have hope, right? It might not be all you need, but probably you need some of it. So I want to turn with that to you, Shira. We of course, the second woman to run as a major party nominee for president lost, did not break the ultimate glass ceiling in this election, lost also to a person who has felony convictions for hush money payments to a porn star. So, that feels bad for women. But there are other things that happened in this election. 2 black women were elected to the United States Senate, which still is actually a massive increase in the number ever. We're actually about to have the first female White House chief of staff. And abortion rights won in 7 states, which was, of course, what you worked on so powerfully. So I want to ask you a few things about that. I mean, does this feel like a silver lining in this election for you? And can you talk to us a little bit about what you're thinking about the differentials in some of those states where there was a big difference in the number of people who voted for the referendum to secure abortion access, but not for Kamala Harris? And more broadly, zooming out, what do you think the learnings are for the abortion rights movement from this campaign?
Well, thank you. And I just want to say thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here. It feels incredibly surreal. And, we all have stories along our journeys of what has brought us to these moments. But I thought about being on this panel, I have to just name, I think I was in 8th grade when I came to New York with I can't remember if it was with Nifty or camp, and I heard Ruth speak for the very first time. And I thought, I want to do that. I want to bring my Jewish values into the public square and fight for a better world. And so I'm really honored to be here. Working alongside partner organizations that I work with every week is such an honor. So thank you. I'm Shira Zemel, she, her. I lead the abortion access campaign work at National Council of Jewish Women. We are the oldest Jewish feminist civil rights organization working for equity and justice for women, children, and families across the United States and Israel. And we do that across 49 sections around this country, working to advance policies that help all women, children, and families. And obviously, the work around reproductive health rights and justice is what gets me out of bed every morning. And yeah, I've been going through all the feelings since the election and obviously holding on to grief, but I also really want to hold on to hope because abortion did win. Abortion, we know, abortion won in 7 of 10 states where abortion was on the ballot and put directly to voters. 57% of the electorate in Florida said that they did not want a 6-week ban, and it's only because of a ridiculous 60% supermajority that we didn't get there, but we're going to go back and keep fighting. And so that tells us that we know that abortion access is powerful and it's popular, and these are policies that Americans want. And so I am trying to hold on to that hope because that gives me the fuel to keep fighting. And I'm just when I think about all the work that we all did leading up to this election and the way Jewish advocates across the country were getting out the vote for all these ballot measures and showing up in coalition with partners at the state level. I mean, here in New York, you guys enshrined abortion access through the ERA. It's just a major shout out to NCJW New York that did so much important work. So we have abortion access now for 11 million people gained reproductive rights protections via these ballot measures that didn't have it before the election. And we need to own this and help it fuel us forward. So yeah, in Arizona, Maryland, Colorado, Montana, New York, Missouri, which is really important, Missouri, we see that the first time since Roe was overturned, we see the overturning of a total abortion ban. You know, I have been reading all the pieces I'm sure you're all reading, and I need to stop reading them about what does it mean when people show up they go and vote and they're voting for abortion access and the way they cast their vote up and down the ballot. And I think that, you know, we just need to remember that people's lives are complicated and people bring so many values and identities in when they go and vote. And I think what it's important for us as a Jewish community is to, as we move forward, is to think about all these folks who campaigned for abortion access and how are they going to protect those who are most impacted by these abortion bans. Like, what are they going to do now? And it's our job to like hold their feet to the fire. And every single time an elected official votes to overturn our rights or take away our fundamental freedoms and our central health care, we can't let it go. And so we have to hold their feet to the fire too. And it's going to be a long fight, but we always knew it was going to be the longest fight. And so I'm holding on to these wins.
Thank you. Just to let everybody know, I've got a few more questions for the panel, but we will open it up. So if you have questions, you'll have a chance. Idit, I want to turn to you now. A lot of the postmortems I've been hearing and reading talk about that one of the more effective ads that the Republicans ran were these ads regarding gender affirming surgery for prisoners, and they had that tagline, you know, Kamala Harris is for they, them, Donald Trump is for you. A lot of people have used that as an example of the Democrats, you know, kind of being tone deaf or focusing too much on what they describe as elite issues rather than the sort of kishka issues of, you know, how much do eggs cost for my family. So I wonder how you've been absorbing that analysis and what you think where that leaves your movement.
Very glad to talk about that. And first, thank you everyone for your warm welcome as I skied in just in time for showtime. Sorry, my plane was late from Boston this morning. But really glad to be here today with all of you. It's like incredible energy in this room and on this slight stage. So first, I actually want to say something about hope, because I come from a family of Holocaust survivors. And in my family, from kind of age 4, when I first gained an inkling of what my grandparents and others had suffered, it was made very clear to me that hope is the strategy. Hope is why we are here. Hope is that my grandparents crawled out of concentration camps in 1945 and somehow were able to trust humans again and love again and rebuild their lives. So that has just deeply animated me. I think it is an enormous part, perhaps the reason that I'm in my 24th year at Keshet and have been able to do this work for so long. So I want to say something about hope, and the hope that is, whether that's in your family history or not, it is in our people's history, and that is a piece of what has fueled us. The other thing that I want to share before addressing directly the scurrilous attacks on trans people is something I've been thinking a lot in terms of change that I have seen in my tenure at Keshet and what that makes me believe about where we are regarding transgender people today. So I started building Keshet in the early 2000s in Massachusetts. Nancy is beaming because she was a very early ally. Thank you, Nancy. And that was the time when the marriage equality case, which ended up legalizing same-sex marriage in Massachusetts, was slowly moving through the courts in Massachusetts. And I remember in every single conversation with other advocates that I had, the refrain was, "It will never happen." And then when it happened in Massachusetts, the refrain became, well, it will never happen nationally. They will never let us marry. In Idaho, in Montana, it will never happen. And I remember standing in front of the Massachusetts State House for hours during what became a 3-year fight to preserve the right to marry in Massachusetts, because of course it came under attack immediately after it was legalized. And the banner said, "The Massachusetts Jewish community supports equal marriage." It's not a panel if Ruth's phone doesn't ring. And not an hour passed without a few people, and probably Nancy was with us for some of these verbal attacks, not an hour passed without a few people racing up to us and saying, how dare you stand here with this sign? This isn't what Jews believe. And they were absolutely right. It's not what Jews believed. It's not what most Massachusetts residents believed. It's certainly not what most people in this country believed. So now it's 2024. How many people in this room have children who cannot believe that there was ever a time when gay people could not get married? So I think a lot about how, you know, the lead attorney on the marriage equality case in Massachusetts, Mary Bonato, who also won the Obergefell case in the Supreme Court, which legalized it nationally, she said recently at an event, we took what was unimaginable and we turned it into a joyous reality, which I think is very true. But I have been sharing instead that what I think is even more extraordinary is we took what was unimaginable and we turned it into an ordinary reality. So that is where we are today, and I believe that that is where we will go, that is where we will be in another 10 years, if not sooner, when it comes to trans rights. And when you look at these statements, they're entirely speculative. They're not actually based on data. The little bit of data that's out there, and I'm sure that there will be more over time, shows that the attack ads were very harmful to trans kids and adults, primarily to kids. We just brought together a bunch of LGBTQ kids in Texas, our first youth Shabbaton, our first youth retreat in Texas this past weekend. Excellent timing. And the kids are terrified. And they talk about these ads. And they talk about what is going to happen. And they talk about stockpiling meds. And they talk about their parents making appointments with lawyers to determine what is going to be the trigger point that tells our family we need to uproot ourselves. So they were harmful, but the data shows that that isn't what led to vote changes.
I'm sort of chilled because I actually, on Sunday, friends who live in Texas who have a trans kid are coming to visit my town to see about moving there. So I feel like I'm really thrilled to hear you had the Shabbaton there. I want to build off of that and open up to the whole panel to sort of hear your guys' your post games on this. We published a piece in the Forward this week by our columnist Rabbi Jay Michelson, who the headline was like, everybody's explanation of this election is wrong, which is always a fun headline. He pointed out various people who had published very self-serving pieces, like this thing that I've been saying was the reason, is my big cause, is the reason that this election went the way it did. And what Jay said, and I really agree with him actually on this, was that, Jay pointed out that really incumbents around the world have all lost elections this year, in the last few years. There's a moment of change. And what I see in the numbers is that the real axis of division was around affluence and college education, and that, the right track, wrong track numbers were the most predictive of how this election went. So I would love to hear from each of you, and I guess we could just go down the line, or whoever wants to start, about what your postmortem analysis is. What are your takeaways about why this election went the way it did, and I guess most importantly, in the hope and looking forward way, what are the lessons learned from that in terms of, there's what Ruth was talking about what we need to do to, and we'll get back into that a little bit about what's likely to happen in the next months and years, but I'm interested maybe in a little more of a political science way of what you think, what you really learned from this election that will help guide your next steps on that scale. Ruth, maybe? You've seen a lot of elections.
I know, but I'm probably not going to go where you want, so.
I'll cut you off.
Okay. I haven't read Jay's piece, but I'm with Jay. We can spend an inordinate amount of time doing what's called navel gazing and trying to figure out what went wrong. We are living in a divided country. There's 1,000 reasons for that. You can look at it on the basis of class, race, gender, all of those factor. The issue is it's a divided country, and the question is, what do we do about that? So first I want to say something, because I believe in hope. So I just want to say that in a divided country, we had what passed for an entirely free and fair election and honored the results and are going to honor the transition of power. If you think that's small, look at the rest of the world. So that gives us something to build on. I also want to say, just because some of these people are in the room, Every single human, in an election this divided, every single human being who rang a doorbell, made a phone call, helped cure a ballot, went to Pennsylvania on endless buses, thanks to the Jewish community and 5,000 other people who organized, just applaud yourselves. I'll give you one example, just one example among millions. Alyssa Slotkin, who came up as a congresswoman in Michigan, then decided to give up her seat in Congress to run for the Senate from Michigan and take Debbie Stabinov's seat. I know 5 people who moved to Michigan and worked for her. So in addition to everybody else in Michigan who was working for her, Alyssa won her election to the United States Senate by 1/3 of 1%. And there are endless examples like that. So please, in the effort to move forward, I think there are, and I'd said that before, and so did the rest of the panel, serious threats to our democracy, but it's still there. And so my answer to you is like, if I have to read one more article on why people did what they did, I'm going to just slit my throat. There are 4 things to do, and I'd be happy to do them right now, then you don't have to call me again.
Okay, go ahead. 4
One
things
is
to do.
pick your issue or issues. You could have abortion or gay rights. You can have race or racism in this country. You cannot work on everything you're going to hear about today, and you probably cannot begin to answer the things in your email inbox. So go sit on a mountaintop like the corner of 57th and Lexington will do fine. And just think, for the next 2 years, given who my family is, given what my history is, given what my future is, what are the things I care about the most? And that's going to be where, and don't, once you answer that question, please do not invent a not-for-profit. Do not invent a Jewish not-for-profit. Do not invent a women's not-for-profit working on that issue. There are people working on these issues. And we have, I can't begin to keep up with those grandchildren, but we have Google text, et cetera, et cetera. It's easy to find a group that's working on that issue. With credit to Elluminate, it's easy to find a group working on that issue from a gender perspective, from a faith perspective, or from any perspective you want. Find the groups and figure out how you can be most helpful to them. That's the first thing. The second thing, since you want some election analysis, is there are midterm elections in 2 years, and the history says we will reverse the House in the midterm elections. So if history is on our side, please do not decide that you don't need to do anything until 2028. Please ignore the 47 people who've now put themselves into your email box telling you that they're going to be the head of the DNC, that they're going to be the Democratic candidate in 2028. Ignore that. There are midterm elections for 435 House seats and, can't do the math, 33 Senate seats in 2 years. And those of you who enjoyed or think you know more about electoral organizing, go do it starting now, and don't invent an organization, just go do it. The third one, which I think is a much bigger question for America, but I'd love to see the Jewish community take more of a lead on this, and that is we need civics education. We cannot keep ignoring the fact that whatever motivated these people and whatever they heard in the president-elect that made them vote for him and whatever they heard about abortion rights that made them split their votes in states after state, it does show that they don't know much about what they need to know. My grandson-in-law, whom some of you know, who's the father of 2 of those great-grandchildren, is a Cuban immigrant from Cuba, and I'm mentioning him for one reason right now. He's been here for 2 years. He has a job, he has a green card, he's married to my granddaughter, he's learning English. He just got the date for his citizenship test. Fortunately, it's mid-December, so it's before January 21st. We listened at the dinner table to his 4.5-year-old son reading him the questions, and his trying to answer the questions in some mixture of English and Spanish. And my husband sits there and says, I don't know the answer to half those questions. So really, you know, you can Google those questions, but we really need to think about how we educate in our own families and households, but in the much broader community about what elections mean, what they stand for, and what opportunity. Okay, and then I will be very short on this. The fourth one I already alluded to a little bit. I need you all to think about, you don't all need to make the same decision. I just need you to think about where you're going to stand when resistance is called for. Okay? If the National Guard shows up someplace in the city, we have easy ways of communicating to people. It might be just going to surround City Hall and making the mayor do the right thing. Thank you for Karen Bass in Los Angeles, who's leading the way as a mayor who's doing the right thing, and Michelle Wu in Boston. It might be just trying to block people from getting arrested. Some of you have done that many times in your lives. Others, it's not your thing. But there is going to be, I believe there is going to be a need for some forms of resistance someplace, and I just want everyone to think ahead of time about whether you are a person who can use your body for resistance to protect the women and children and men that I talked about before.
So
I have to say one thing, because Naomi asked us to invoke women leaders, and Shira spoke beautifully about that. So you have an obligation. You've all heard this from me before. You have an obligation in this building. Before you leave, go to the 6th floor. There's a lot of pictures. The first executive director, first column, center row, first executive director of a federation in New York is my grandfather.
wonderful. Okay, so Idit, and then we'll keep going if you want to pick up on anything that Ruth said, or if you'd like to go back to the original question, just a reminder, sort of interested in your best takeaways from what did you learn from what happened this fall?
I am with Ruth. I don't feel like it's particularly. I mean, I'm with Ruth, generally speaking, but on and for years. No, but
Another part of the merch store. There's despair is not a strategy, and I'm with Ruth are the
Yes.
two T-shirts so far.
No, I do have to say, given that this is a conference about women's leadership and what is it called, women going forward, something like that. Okay, something like that. My wife had the privilege of working closely with Ruth for almost 10 years, so I heard a lot about Ruth before I really got to know her myself. And I heard stories that have led me over the years at various points when I am facing some challenge, minor or major, to think, what would Ruth do? So I do that.
We will also have little bracelets that say, what would Ruth do? Keep going.
Okay, but Jodi, I will honor your question and say that I don't engage with it very much because I think that invariably already these analyses are devolving into self-destructive narratives within the Democratic Party on the left, and that is the particular pathology, I would say, of the left that the right somehow has managed largely to escape. It has always been our undoing, and I do not want to see us feed that again and again. It also just seems very clear that it was the economy. That sure, there were all of these other fear narratives at work, but that it was the economy. Now the question is, how do we make the stories of the real people who are going to suffer as a result, how do we make those more real next time? How do we take the parents of the trans kids who are calling our office saying, can you tell us what to do? When is it time to move? How do we make those fears and vulnerabilities real so that it's not an abstraction? Because I don't think people didn't vote for her because they didn't want to vote for someone who was for they, them. But they also weren't motivated to want to protect those people to vote for her, and to protect immigrants, and to protect people of color, and so many other marginalized people. So I completely second Ruth's 4 directives. But I would urge you that while I agree that you cannot pick more than one issue, that you can pick an issue to go deep on and be committed to stand up in some way, whether it is figurative or literal, when they come for people in our communities, because they probably will.
I think it's interesting what you said, Edie, because the other day you said this thing about how one of the reasons marriage equality passed was because everybody knows and loves gay people who are in same-sex relationships, and that the sociological shift around trans rights will come as that becomes more true, and you just spoke about humanizing them in the more in a public, even abstract context. I do think the flip side of that is also an explanation, right? Which was the disconnect between, many people perceived a disconnect between the Democratic Party's campaign and the real people's experience of, struggling economically or whatever. Like it's all about that abstraction rather than kind of real people in your life who you are connecting with and understanding how things affect them. I mean, I think that's the core of it. So we should all have more real, humanize everybody, humanize the...
I mean, ultimately, for everyone, it's about being seen. That's what people need.
Okay, Yolanda.
It's so interesting. I just have to take a deep breath on this question because when I woke up the next morning, I was actually, I think this is what moved me in and out of despair to like anger, to hear people dissecting what went wrong and what could have been done differently and not really focusing on, I think, the real underlying issue. If you look at this country, I think the exit polls were like surface level kinds of things. We haven't really gotten to the root of the challenge. I think that was inherent in what came as an outcome of this election. And there are these intersecting identities that are constant in our community. I mean, I sit here as a Black Jewish woman from the South. I mean, I can add all these other identities to who I am. And I think what we really saw, honestly, is misogyny and then exacerbated by Kamala being a woman of color. I mean, that's just something that no one is really talking about. We're kind of in this kind of intellectualizing all the things that happened, and we haven't really stopped to say, let's talk about what's right in front of us. What is the thing that is most apparent? There are some things that could have been done differently. Yes, there always will be. But then how do we really get to the root causes of things? And I agree with Ruth and Idit that at this point, let's stop talking about all the things that could have been done, and we should have talked about different issues, and we should have been sitting at, kitchen tables talking to people, all of these things. We did all of these things, and here's where we are. This is the world as it is, and I know there's a world that we want to see, but we have to continue to fight for that world. We get legislation passed, that's a step in the process. We have to then continue to fight and fight and fight to make sure that we can maintain those rights. A couple of things that come to mind for me as we move forward, I talked about this idea of really taking this time to learn and grow and transform ourselves. I think another piece to that is to look at what's been done before and really look at that as a blueprint. But how do we build upon that? How do we make sure that we are addressing the moment that's in front of us? Additionally, I think that the work that we are doing is an actual act of liberation. We are doing the work, and we just have to continue to fight for that. And then I think the fourth thing that I would add to kind of a call to action for all of us, and it's one for me as well, that we have to make sure we see every person through B'Tselem Elohim, through the image of God. And when we do that, our values will come forth, and we will do what is right for all of humanity. And right now, I think there are forces out there that are trying to divide us along these lines so we can point fingers at why someone voted this way or why someone voted that way. And at the end of the day, if we continue to keep in mind who we are as Jewish people, as human beings, we will do the right thing. And the arc of the universe is long, but you know this quote, it tends to bend toward justice.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm very much with my fellow panelists here. Like, I'm just ready to keep fighting. Like, I want to keep moving. And, the stakes have never been higher. And so I'm trying to remember that one of the reasons that I think abortion really did win the day is that we're seeing a conversation shift around abortion access in this country, which I think we all saw in the discourse around the election, that we're talking about this issue as essential health care, and we're hearing the stories of people who were killed and died because of their state's abortion bans. And the shift in the conversation away from it being about personal choice and more about structural access and access to essential health care, and I also see the way people I know, people across the country are bringing their own stories out of the shadows and saying, I have 2 children. I've had 4 miscarriages. Like, I've needed abortion care, essential health care, for miscarriage treatment. Like, people are talking about their own experiences, and that humanizes what we're really talking about. And it's really, that gives me hope, like the way that the conversation shifts. And I think that we're seeing the way we're able to like talk about abortion. Like, we're not talking about it as a euphemism, like a person's right to choose. Like, we're talking about what we need, which is essential healthcare and centering equity and dignity and agency, and that gives me hope. I think the other thing, and just from like our vantage here as Jewish advocates, I'm seeing the way that the Jewish community is coming together with faith partners and people of no faith and reclaiming a narrative in this country around religion and abortion. And that is absolutely like part of this story. And I want us to like center that as the Jewish community, the way that we're able to fight white Christian nationalism that has a stronghold in this country by saying like, our tradition offers a radically different understanding of this issue of like when life begins, and we're not going to let people's faith define that for us, and we certainly can't be letting their theology like define what healthcare I have access to. And so the power when we know that like Pew tells us 83% of the Jewish community believes that abortion should be legal, but what I've seen over the past 3 years is like how people who have that like deep commitment to abortion access, how they're learning to like make a really strong connection to our own faith tradition and bring those values like into the public square and reclaim this narrative. And that is so powerful. And like, that's how we're going to fight and keep moving forward. And so that gives me hope too.
Thank you. Yes, and then I'm going to open it up for other questions. Yeah, Idit has something to add.
So just quickly, listening to Shira reminded me of the many number of times, and honestly, I'm still kind of surprised every time it happens when we have organized delegations, sometimes just of Jews, sometimes they're part of interfaith delegations, to go and meet with legislators to lobby for or against an LGBTQ rights piece of legislation. And the surprise is always that these often Republican, always Christian, sometimes conservative evangelicals say, wow, it is so amazing to hear from people of faith who are expressing another point of view. And I always kind of hold my breath to make sure that the Jews don't protest and say we're not people of faith, because so many of them aren't, so many of us aren't. But in any case, this, and just to draw it really close, this just happened in the last legislative session in Florida, which has been one of the infamous leaders in this country in terms of the number of anti-LGBTQ pieces of legislation proposed and passed. And together with our interfaith partners, we had this kind of conversation after conversation with legislators, which played a key role. You never really know the causal link with this kind of work, but which we know played a key role in the defeat of 21 of 22 anti-LGBTQ pieces of legislation.
Okay. I have more questions if you don't, but if you do, raise your hand.
Okay, my question is, I'm very active in politics, and we especially on, I'll call it the abortion issue, we have to include men. So why are we calling it abortion, which a man doesn't need? Why are we not using reproductive rights, which we know men need, because if they get a woman pregnant, they're concerned. If somebody, as we said, if somebody has had a miscarriage, their wife, whatever. So what is the thought? And so my specific question is, why are you not using reproductive rights as
And I'll just to build out on that question, Shira, it's interesting because you were talking about the way, I mean, there has already been a language shift to focus on abortion access versus abortion rights or choice. And you talked about the broader shift beyond language and, thinking of it as an essential healthcare tool as opposed to a choice. So where do you sit on the reproductive rights versus abortion access?
Well,
terminology?
I think what's really important is to use specific language when we're talking about our own stories. And so I think one of the reasons that I really think it's so important for people to say the word abortion is because I think for too long we were allowing people to like define abortion as about shame and sin, but we know the truth. Abortion is about autonomy and agency and equity. And so I think part of like why I really encourage people to say the word abortion is because we have to like know that abortion is essential health care, and when we don't say the word, we are shying away from something that we all need. And
Yeah.
I would also argue that like men need abortion. Like Renee Bracey Sherman is famously quoted as saying, we all love someone who has had an abortion. And I would say, if you think you don't, it's actually probably more accurate that no one has yet shared their abortion story with you. And if you have had an abortion, the data would tell us that 1 in 4 people of reproductive age in this room have had an abortion, and you've shared those stories with people that you know. Like, you're giving them a gift. Like, we need to bring abortion like out of the shadows. And I do talk about reproductive freedom as well. I think reproductive rights is really talking about our legal rights, but even when we had the protections of Roe, too many people were left behind by Roe. People didn't have access to the health care that they needed, and I'm talking about Black and brown women, I'm talking about people who live in rural communities, I'm talking about trans people, I'm talking about low-income people. And so it's not just reproductive rights, it's reproductive access, it's healthcare access, it's this framework that Black reproductive justice advocates have been saying forever, that we need to take leadership from them and say this is about structural access, and it's not just about our legal rights. So that's a couple of different answers to that.
Thank you. Sorry. Yes, let's go back there.
I'm curious about the role of mis and disinformation and the changes that are coming in the media and how that can impact our strategy. I think I felt really strong that we had a great ground game, but I heard all along that Trump didn't have a ground game, but he used technology and he used Elon Musk. So what are we going to do to change our strategy and rethink our strategy using the tools that exist in the world and how people get information now?
Maybe I'll take that since I work in the media. I think that this is something that we think about all the time, that one of the realities of this election was the extent to which we live in a divided country, as Ruth was talking about before, plays out in so many different ways, including in what media people consume. And that I feel like the sort of prior chapter of this story was about the misinformation and disinformation campaigns happening primarily on social media, and what role the more public media or journalism had in sort of debunking the propagandists or activists on social media. But one of the things we saw in this cycle was the extent to which partisan, polarized media had become the norm for most people. And so, there just was literally not a baseline of shared information. We just see increasingly, what started with sort of a sense of the Fox News watchers and MSNBC watchers are different people, has now infiltrated across the media information ecosystem. So you have that divide of literally how people are watching election returns as well as other things, but also social media feeds and bubbles and algorithms, and also then really partisan news outlets that sort of they look a lot like the mainstream media looks. They use the same tools. They write articles that quote experts, but they come from a place not of discovery and curiosity, which is what fuels my journalism and our journalism at The Forward, but from a place of advocacy and kind of starting an article with not a question, but with an outcome, an answer. And so, I have a very self-serving answer to this, which is support, independent journalism, especially nonprofits like The Forward, but also the local nonprofits in your communities that are trying to make up for the massive loss of local news organizations. There are fewer than half the working journalists today than there were a decade ago, and about a quarter of local publications have been shut down or totally decimated. So we have fewer and fewer people who are just doing accountability journalism, who are fact checking the crazy things that people see on the paid ads by super PACs and dark money campaigns. So, and I think this relates back to something that Ruth said very early on about civic engagement, but civic education. I think media literacy has become so important for our kids. It's something that I'm lucky that this is a conversation that they have in my kids' schools. But it's my kid will come to me and be like, my friend wants to know if it's true that this was an actual story. That is it true that the IDF is using organs of dead Palestinians and whatever? And it's well, let's, we did a little exercise of looking up this headline. What is the source? And I think so making sure that people have tools to analyze the information that they see on their feeds and contextualize it and find more reliable sources. That's my cause that I'm going to focus on. So, and I hope some of you will pick that cause, because I think that we aren't having one conversation in this country, and there's no baseline of axiomatic facts. Everything is subject to interpretation, and a lot of nefarious forces are fueling the interpretation with huge amounts of money by biasing the sources. That other hand back there is good.
Hi, all. Thank you so much, Lonnie Santo from Footsteps. And first of all, I think that this panel is exactly what I needed today, so thank you. For context, and folks who might not know, Footsteps supports and affirms individuals who are choosing to leave Haredi communities and enter mainstream society. And in recent years, more than 50% of our members have started to identify as queer. And my question comes from that space, and our staff is probably more than 50% queer also. I'm trying to figure out from both a heart space of affirming where people are at, and from a space of not wanting to create hysteria and build into the maybe misinformation that Idit, you alluded to of what's really happening. How can we be there for folks who are making plans to leave the country because they're really genuinely afraid? I have good friends who are really afraid, and they're looking in Mexico and Canada and Costa Rica. And I want to be there for them, I do, and I don't want to be how are you thinking about this? And at the same time, I want us to, those of us who could stay and fight for this country we believe in, this vision of democracy that we believe in, that we hope could be a beacon of hope, what would any of you recommend we do for folks who are in that space? And it could be broadened into immigrant, new American issues, or abortion access folks, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be in the space.
Yeah, what do you say to people who are giving up and thinking about leaving? Who wants to start with that? Anyone?
When I hear this, what comes to mind is I just think about channeling the immense privilege that I hold in this moment, and why I'm gonna stay and keep fighting, and those who need to tap out have to tap out, and those of us who can stay in it are gonna stay. And I think so that's one thing, and I just, we hope the Jewish story is one of continuing to fight even when the journey ahead is grueling, and the Jewish story is having the strength to believe in a better world and fighting hell to build it. And so those of us who can stay and channel the immense privilege we have in this moment to keep fighting, because we know that I'm gonna be okay, my family's gonna be okay, and too many people are gonna suffer, that's why I'm gonna have to say. And for the people who are really at threat and they're gonna suffer, I get it, they gotta tap out.
About 10 years ago, I had the privilege to take a group of students on a civil rights journey. I used to do that in my previous role before working for the Union for Reform Judaism, and we would go through the South and we would meet civil rights leaders, and we had an opportunity to meet the great late Reverend C.T. Vivian. And he crowded us into his living room and he talked to the young people. He said, you know, in response to a question, how did you get up every day and put your life on the line? And he said, I woke up every day knowing that I had an opportunity to make a difference. And I had to put it in my mind that I had to be willing to give something up. And you know, give something up in that period of time could have meant his life. And so I think, you know, not to bring gloom and doom on this, but I do think we're going to have to think about those of us who sit at a place of privilege and a place where we are not going to be impacted in the ways that a lot of people are, that the majority of the people will be in this country. What are we willing to give up? What are we willing to put on the line to protect those who do not have a voice, who do not have the resources, who do not have places to go in this very challenging, unknown period that we are about to embark upon?
So yes and yes, and I will add, you know, concretely, I trust that you're doing this, Lonnie, with your staff, but I'll share, you know, with our staff, which includes, I'd say, a minority of people who are making or are exploring making plans to leave. And I mean, we have staff who live in Florida and Texas, and within 2 days of the election, they were meeting with their lawyers to really assess their legal status and to speak with their partners and their families, kind of what are the trigger points that will lead us to decide to leave. You know, to remember that most of us have both privilege and aspects of our lives and our identities in which we experience oppression, and so, you know, and so it's not an either or, of course. And you know, to keep holding space for staff, you know, but in advance of the election, we planned, I think, 2 optional staff gathering spaces. But now we have them scheduled, like, I think through February. And we'll see. I mean, we may stop. They may need to multiply. And, you know, and just, you know, recognize that I think for a lot of people just coming together, I mean, and within a workplace, to know that the workplace cares and recognizes that, yes, the work needs to get done, and part of the work is to take care of yourself. So that's a piece of it as well.
Yeah.
So as the grandmother of 5 granddaughters and 2 grandsons, what do I say to them in this time when the only world they have ever known is a world with Roe, is a world where a black man can be elected president, where tzedakah means justice, and where equality and equity is a Jewish value, and they now think that this may no longer be true?
Yes, Ruth, what should we say to our grandchildren? You've got some.
I've got a lot. And I'll go back to Lonnie and to Idit's comments. Again, if you take centrally, as Yolanda said, B'Tselem Elohim, that means that everybody has to make their own decision. And part of what we need to be doing for each other is supporting those decisions. Okay, I have black queer family. We had a decision even before the election about, like, we're not talking about Canada or Costa Rica, just where in the Northeast to buy property. Do you stay in Brooklyn or do you go to the suburbs? And I was the Brooklyn advocate. I won, but for just those reasons, it's like, where will people be safer? That's a real. You cannot survive as an advocate for social change unless you indulge in some kinds of self-care. I'm delighted that Jodi extracted from all of us things like bird watching and skiing, and it's not like we go and do that all the time. It's like you have to have some place where you can take stock of yourself. And so I would say for other people, the best thing you can do for them is to say, yes, you're right to be thinking about that. And then the answer, and the answer to the broader question is, we need to do the kind of organizing and social change work that all of us are talking about, that Illuminate believes in, and make it more visible. Because your granddaughters need to know that Shira spoke eloquently about the abortion issues. We have in cohort 6 someone who is the leading advocate for abortion, telehealth abortion. Stand up for a minute. She's on my panel this afternoon, so you can hear her. But it's not just Julie. It's what I said before. There are organizations doing all of this work. We can make them stronger. But just to your point, we can make them much more visible. Talk to your grandchildren about what's happening in the world. I'm sorry that I'm so old, but I do, from time to time, have to say to people, you know, we actually won a war once. So, and I really, you know, and I believe that it was crazy, not well organized, not nearly as smart as organizers today, but organizing against that war stopped that war sooner. This is Vietnam, for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about. But it's relevant pieces of history. So sure, you know, that the statement you should be making from this microphone is like tell the entire history of the Jewish people, and we're still here. But I'm just saying in a more you know, part of my answer to Lonnie is like those families need to see that the whatever pick your thing, that the Brooklyn Trans Organization or the anti-racism efforts in their community, in their local school, are stronger. They need to see more people coming out. If just to keep you alert, if Moms for Liberty is trying to take over a school district that you know, that's the place to go organized. Because, excuse me, but they're crazy and they will destroy public education in the name of anti-human rights. But there are those efforts, but we have to resist those efforts, and we have to tell those grandchildren that's what we're doing. Okay, this is a side note, but my 4.5-year-old great-grandson discovered that I donate blood. I would advise all of you to do that. It's the most enjoyable thing you can do. You get an hour of private time with a magazine. And my 4.5-year-old grandson now knows that I've donated 9 gallons of blood in my life. And I'm saying that's, who knows what that means to him right now, but that's just like the immediate example that came to mind. Is like, if you know that there is organizing and organizers for change and that you're following those people. So I have no idea that Jodi's not going to give me the mic again. So I'm going to say what I would say at the end, which goes back to this discussion about hope. So the Chinese philosopher Lu Xun said, hope is like a path in the countryside. Originally, there was no path. And then when people walked all the time in the way, then when people walked all the time in the same direction, a path appeared. That's what we're about, is creating those paths of hope.
So that is a really excellent place to end. However, no, that's beautiful. Thank you. I am going to actually ask Shira to share with us some thoughts about a seasonal craft that we might all do, because I think a lot of you have mentioned self-care, so I'm putting you on the spot. Can you share your most recent seasonal craft activity? Okay. Or something upcoming?
Yeah. No, I just bought clay menorahs, and I'm having all my neighbors over with the little, you know, paint pots, and most of my kids' friends on our street are not Jewish, and so my kids are gonna paint menorahs with their friends, and then we're gonna light the Chanukiot together. So you can get those at Target.
Awesome. Thank you very
Plug for
much.
capitalism.
Thank you, everybody.